After 3 years of marriage, my husband cheated on me with my best friend. In the 3rd year of our marriage, I caught my husband and my best friend in the act at home. They were so engrossed in their affair that they didn't even notice my return. I quietly downloaded the video from the surveillance before politely knocking on the door. "Am I interrupting?" Then I swung the door wide open. "Since you love fooling around so much, should I invite more people to watch?" Everyone thought my feelings for Ethan had turned to hatred, even he believed it. It wasn't until he knelt and begged for reconciliation that he realized the truth. My name is Yvonne. I've had a smooth-sailing life since childhood. I attended a prestigious university, landed a stable job after graduation, and even married the love of my life. It's the kind of life many envy. Ethan and I grew up together, and after graduating from high school, it was only natural that we ended up together. During college, Ethan became obsessed with photography and took me everywhere to capture scenes. Once, while hiking, he lost his footing and nearly fell off a cliff. I lunged forward and grabbed him tightly, holding on until rescuers arrived. As a result, I injured the nerves in my right hand, leaving me with severe aftereffects. Ethan was both moved and heartbroken. He swore an oath that he would take care of me for the rest of my life. Did he love me back then? After my right hand was injured, I could no longer continue my original job. I stayed home for over half a year, learning to use my left hand until it became just as proficient. Only then did I find a new job. Now, I've been working this job for 4 or 5 years and have long since been promoted to a managerial position with a salary increase. Because the benefits and treatment are quite good, I've settled in comfortably and stayed. Everyone thinks I'm lucky. But no one sees the effort I've put in behind the scenes for this job. This time, because a new branch is being established, the boss asked me to take a few people over to check it out. Things went smoothly, so I returned home 2 days early. I didn't notify Ethan, wanting to surprise him. But instead, he gave me a shock. The two of them didn't even make it to the bedroom, they were entangled on the sofa. From initial surprise, I quickly became indifferent. This marriage has truly reached its end. I took out my phone, opened the living room surveillance footage, and downloaded the entire 2-hour segment for safekeeping. Then, leaning against the doorframe, I knocked politely. Ethan was caught off guard and slumped down instantly, while Cecilia hid behind him. The living room was in complete disarray, with not a single thing to cover themselves. I smiled and swung the front door wide open. Couldn't wait, could you? Broad daylight, not even bothering with the bedroom, right here in the living room. Seems you two have quite the performance streak. How about we let the neighbors have a look? Ethan's face paled as he stammered, "Yvonne, I was wrong. Please don't be angry." Cecilia peeked out from behind him, tears welling up. "Yvonne, I know you're furious, but you can't do this to us." I scoffed, stepping inside and tossing the scattered clothes out the door. "You sleep with my husband and dare say I'm the one harming you?" I pointed at the exit. "If you don't want your shame exposed, get out now." Ethan tried to grab me but, stark naked, only revealed more marks as he stood. The moment he moved, Cecilia behind him was left completely exposed. She shrieked, "At least cover me." Ethan snapped, "Shut up and get out." He stormed into the bedroom to dress, ignoring whether Cecilia was clothed or not. Clenching her teeth, Cecilia shot me a venomous glare, grabbed a couch cushion to barely cover herself, and ran out barefoot to collect her clothes. Watching their frantic scramble, I felt nothing but absurdity. Strangely, an odd calm washed over me. A startled cry came from outside the door. "Oh my, what kind of person walks around naked in broad daylight? Young people these days have no shame at all." Cecilia shrieked, scrambling inside while clutching her clothes. Seeing me smirk at her, she let out a hysterical scream, pouncing at me like a bristling cat. "Get away!" Ethan rushed out and shoved her hard. Caught off guard, Cecilia fell heavily onto the floor. The clothes she hadn't yet put on scattered everywhere, revealing stark red marks against the pale skin of her inner thighs. She didn't get up immediately, just lay there limp, her hair disheveled, her eyes hollow, utterly defeated. Whimpers escaped her throat, soon escalating into wailing sobs. "Ethan. If you didn't want to, could I have forced you into bed? You were the one who said you liked me when we were in bed. Now you're turning around and denying it, saying I seduced you." Ethan ignored Cecilia's tantrum on the floor. He turned away, his face full of regret. I stood there, expressionless, thinking, well, the mood's set, should I start crying too? I've always been emotionally detached since childhood. Even when the closest people to me cried in front of me, my heart would only ripple slightly before quickly settling back to calm. During my school years, I was the model student in teachers' eyes, well-behaved and rule-following. I studied hard, lived a routine life, with no particularly dramatic youthful memories. My only worry was probably how to finish homework more efficiently so I'd have more time to daydream. After graduating from high school, Ethan confessed his feelings to me. He said he had liked me since freshman year and endured it silently for 3 years. I thought about it, we were just too familiar with each other. From elementary school to high school, we had always been classmates, seeing each other constantly. He had indeed been good to me, quietly saving me a seat in the library or remembering the snacks I casually mentioned. Anyway, people always have to get married eventually. Marrying someone you know inside out is better than marrying a stranger. My parents were very pleased with Ethan, finding him steady and reliable, with a family background that matched ours. After we officially got together, Ethan treated me exceptionally well, attending to every detail. He delivered breakfast to my doorstep, cared for me tirelessly when I was sick, and never missed an anniversary gift. I grew accustomed to his devotion and enjoyed the feeling of being taken care of. But he always said he couldn't feel my love in return. Back then, I didn't quite understand what love was supposed to feel like or how to prove it. Until that accident happened, I instinctively grabbed him, at the cost of permanent nerve damage in my right hand, leaving it unable to perform delicate tasks. After that, Ethan never again said he couldn't feel my love. He probably thought, if she's willing to risk her life for me, she must love me desperately. After we got married, we got along harmoniously. I worked hard to learn how to place him in the role of a husband and fulfill my duties as a wife. Everyone thought our marriage was blissful and flawless. Before this, I had never once considered divorce. Ethan shoved a disheveled Cecilia out the door. The lingering scent of the woman's rich perfume mixed with the familiar cedar fragrance on his clothes in the entryway, making me sick to my stomach. At first glance, I caught sight of the glaring hickey on his neck, vivid red and suggestive. My right hand instinctively curled slightly, the nerves there, injured while saving him, still ached faintly on damp, gloomy days. Truthfully, I didn't regret the act of saving someone itself. In that moment, I probably would have reached out to anyone. I just regretted that the one I saved turned out to be this kind of trash. A wave of physiological nausea surged up my throat, but I forced it down. "Ethan, let's get a divorce." He seemed to have all his strength drained, sliding off the couch and kneeling clumsily before me. "No." Large tears rolled down his face, as if he were drowning in regret. "No, no divorce." Ethan shook his head frantically, stammering, "Honey, I was just confused for a moment, it was Cecilia who seduced me. I love you, it's always been you." He grabbed my right hand, pressing his forehead tightly against the back of it. Scalding tears fell drop by drop, soaking my skin. The warmth of his fingertips sent a shiver of disgust through me, like countless slimy worms wriggling desperately into my pores. I could barely suppress the urge to shake him off. "Ethan, I don't love you." I said I don't love you, not that I don't love you anymore. "Let's get a divorce." "No, no, honey, I was wrong, I know I was wrong." He crawled forward on his knees, lifting his tear-streaked face in desperate pleading. "Hit me, yell at me, do anything, just let me make it right." He raised his head, his bloodshot eyes flickering with a faint glimmer of hope. Seeing my continued indifference, Ethan, like a beast backed into a corner, suddenly reached out and desperately grabbed my right hand, forcing it toward his own face. Hit me. Hit me. Please. I recoiled as if scalded by boiling oil, using all my strength to break free. Why, he finally roared uncontrollably, his eyes bloodshot and his face twisted with fury. How could you not love me? If you didn't love me, why did you risk your life to save me back then? You were willing to die for me. His emotions ran wild, his demeanor bordering on madness. So what? Did it earn me your loyalty? The frenzy on Ethan's face froze instantly. He released my hand, as if drained of his last ounce of strength, and collapsed to his knees on the floor once more. This time, he couldn't even muster a sob, just lay there, limp and broken, like a dog with its spine ripped out. I took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the churning disgust and irritation in my chest. Ethan, I'll give you 3 days to think it over. If you don't agree to an uncontested divorce, we'll see each other in court. Oh, and, I curled my lips slightly into a frosty smile, those spectacular scenes of yours in the foyer just now? The home surveillance cameras caught every last detail. As ironclad evidence of your marital infidelity, I believe this is enough for the judge to rule you as the at-fault party. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. I needed to pack my things and leave this disgusting place. Ethan seemed to snap out of his daze, scrambling over on his hands and knees, trying to grab my arm. Honey, please don't go, I beg you. I'll leave, I'll move out, this home can still be yours. Just don't go, okay? He pleaded incoherently. I shook off his hand and stared at him coldly. This place was already tainted. I only grabbed a few everyday clothes from the wardrobe at random. Carrying those meager pieces of clothing, I turned and left without hesitation. Did Ethan truly love me? If he did, why would he betray me and fool around with Cecilia in our own home? And since he had already cheated, why did he act so utterly devastated when I exposed everything, as if I were his entire world? I couldn't understand. In the end, I arrived at a vague answer. Perhaps it wasn't that he couldn't bear losing me. He just couldn't accept that the woman who once risked her life to save him, who valued him more than herself, would suddenly and resolutely declare, I don't love you anymore. When I returned to my parents' home, the living room light was still on. My mother, wrapped in a coat, stepped out of her room and froze at the sight of me standing alone, clutching just a few pieces of clothing. Why did you come back alone? Where's Ethan? I should probably act more pitiful right now, wailing my heart out to fit the image of a wife betrayed by her husband. I tried, but my eyes were so dry they ached, and not a single tear would fall. Mom, Ethan cheated on me. I'm filing for divorce, so I came back. The color drained from Mom's face instantly. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but in the end, she just stared at me blankly, her gaze complicated. After a long while, she finally spoke cautiously, her voice trembling slightly as she awkwardly changed the subject. Then, have you eaten yet? I shook my head. No. I just got back from a business trip and I'm exhausted. I want to rest in my room for a bit. I hadn't cried, not even a hint of a sob. Yet Mom seemed convinced I was utterly heartbroken. The way she looked at me was filled with worry and fear, carefully supporting me as if she feared I might collapse any second and do something reckless. For the first time in my life, she treated me with such caution, as if I were a fragile piece of porcelain that might shatter at the slightest touch. Later, I overheard her whispering to Dad, this child, she's so heartbroken she can't even cry anymore. While I was consulting about the divorce, Ethan wasn't idle. Calls and texts buzzed incessantly like flies. The messages were all the same. I love you, only you. I was wrong, honey. I lost my head for a moment. In the end, he even said that after we got divorced, he would pursue me all over again, and we could start fresh. I stared at those words, barely holding back a laugh. Did he think this was some game where you could reload a save file? Without hesitation, I dragged all his contact information into the blacklist. But after I blocked Ethan, he found another stage to continue his performance of devotion. He showed up at my doorstep every single day without fail, standing there from dawn till dusk like some modern-day husband-longing stone. It was beyond irritating. Just when my patience with his harassment was about to run out, Cecilia reached out to me, wanting to meet. Cecilia and I met at the cafe we used to frequent, one with a poetic name, Bygone Days. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows was the familiar street view, though now it carried a tinge of desolation, as if the world had moved on without us. I ordered a hot latte, its slightly bitter aroma wafting through the air. Cecilia didn't order anything. She simply sat quietly across from me, hands folded on her lap, her gaze fixed intently on me. Her eyes were filled with poorly concealed resentment and schadenfreude. She probably expected me to look haggard, teary-eyed, like some abandoned, bitter woman now that Ethan and I were divorcing. After all, in her mind, I had loved Ethan so much, enough to sacrifice everything for him. How could she know that I never truly loved Ethan? Just like him, she never really noticed me. Yvonne. Her eyes slightly reddened, and she gently pressed her fingertips to the corners, as if holding back tears about to spill. Could you let Ethan be with me? Please? I really love him, so very much. Yvonne, we're best friends. We shouldn't have come to this point over a man. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. The warm liquid slid down my throat, bringing a fleeting warmth. I put on an expression of sudden realization and stared at her intently. Cecilia, so you do remember we were best friends? Do you recall our senior year of high school? Before the final exams, when those troublemakers cornered you in the alley behind the school, who was it that pulled you out of their grasp? You clung to me then, crying so hard your snot and tears smeared all over me, trembling like a leaf in the autumn wind, saying you didn't want to live anymore. After hearing my words, Cecilia's eyes completely reddened, this time for real, brimming with tears. She reached out as if to take my hand, just like countless times before, seeking my comfort and strength. My hand holding the coffee cup tilted slightly, deftly avoiding her touch. Her hand froze mid-air, fingers curling faintly. That tiny dodge was like the sharpest needle, piercing through the carefully maintained facade of her pitiable vulnerability. She broke. Why? Her voice suddenly rose, her eyes instantly turning sharp, no longer the delicate, innocent little flower. Yvonne. Why do you get everything so easily? You effortlessly got into such a great university. You have such a perfect family. Your parents treat you like a princess. Even in love, you found someone like Ethan, a husband with a good background, handsome, and who treats you so well. And me? What do I have? A broken family, a father who only drinks and gambles, a mother who remarried and acts like I don't exist. What kind of life am I living? A complete mess. Every time you comfort me, I feel like you're showing off. Do you even know? Your casual concern sounds like mockery to me, like you're rubbing in how much of a failure I am. Why are you always the one looking down, doling out pity, while I'm the one groveling in the dirt, begging for your comfort? Her chest heaved violently, her eyes brimming with long-suppressed resentment, jealousy, and venom, like a lurking snake finally baring its fangs. So, I seduced Ethan. I wanted to take away the most important thing you have. This time, Yvonne, it's finally my turn to win. Her face twisted into a near-grotesque smile. Cecilia probably thought she had finally beaten me once, finally held her head high and turned the tables. The twisted smile on Cecilia's face gradually subsided, replaced by a haughty triumph. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her bag and spread it open in front of me. Yvonne, I forgot to tell you one more thing. I'm pregnant. It was a pregnancy test report. I couldn't even be bothered to look closely. When did this start? Cecilia lifted her chin proudly, her eyes and brows brimming with smugness. About 6 months ago. Back then, you probably still thought you had the happiest marriage in the world. Even earlier than I had imagined. During that time, I was indeed busy with an important project, often working late into the night. Looking back now, Ethan's unusual behavior had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Cecilia, you must have misunderstood. I never pick up trash others have thrown away. The smile froze on her face. You've schemed for so long, all for a man I couldn't care less about? You think you've won? I shook my head slightly, my tone tinged with pity. Cecilia, it's only at this moment that I've truly realized. You never really understood me. And you were never worth me pouring my heart out for you. My phone had been recording from the very moment our conversation began. I knew she had asked to meet me, most likely because of Ethan's mess. And now, it seemed there was an extra surprise thrown in. By the time I left Old Times, the sky had already darkened. Back at my apartment complex, a familiar yet disheveled figure suddenly darted out, blocking my path. It was Ethan. After just a few days, he looked like a different person. His hair was greasy and plastered to his forehead, his face unshaven, his eyes sunken. His shirt was wrinkled and carried a faint mix of alcohol and cigarette smoke. When he saw me, his eyes lit up briefly before dimming again, tinged with a cautious, pleading look. Yvonne. I stopped, staring at him expressionlessly. I saw Cecilia today. He flinched, his gaze darting away. She's pregnant. Ethan's face turned deathly pale, his lips trembling as if trying to speak, but no words came out. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, at the Civil Affairs Bureau for the divorce. I paused, watching his devastated expression, then added, if you don't show up, expect a court summons. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at me. A suppressed sob escaped his lips, and his tall frame swayed violently. Bean-sized tears rolled unexpectedly from his reddened eyes, splattering on the ground and leaving small wet stains. His voice hoarse, he began to cry, his shoulders shaking violently. Wife. Ethan wept uncontrollably, choking on his words as he looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. Is it really impossible for us anymore? Yes. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. The next second, he abruptly crouched down, hugging his head in his hands, wailing like a helpless child in the courtyard downstairs. I took a deep breath, suppressing the faint ripple in my heart, and resolutely turned around to stride away. Everyone thought I loved Ethan deeply, but I didn't. Everyone thought I was lucky, with a smooth-sailing life and a happy family, but that wasn't true either. There's something wrong with me, but I have no intention of fixing it. In my memory, my parents only started to love me after they noticed something was off during my high school years. That love was cautious, filled with probing and attempts to make up for something. But it was already too late. When I was in my second year of middle school, some long-unseen relatives visited. At the dinner table, someone asked me with a smile how old I was and what grade I was in. My dad said I was 15, in the second year. My mom immediately retorted, nonsense. You're clearly 14, still in the first year. They argued right in front of everyone. One said I was born in the year of the tiger, the other insisted it was the year of the rabbit. In the end, they unanimously decided I was 13, in the first year of middle school. But that year, I was actually 14, already in the second semester of the second year. All I could do was smile awkwardly, like an insignificant prop, unable to even assert my own age or grade. At that moment, I clearly realized that perhaps I truly held little weight in their hearts. I had an older brother. My parents always had double standards when it came to him and me. For my brother's birthday, there were always new toys and lavish dishes, sometimes even a small cake. But for my birthday, because it fell close to the Lunar New Year, a simple "there's plenty during the holidays, don't be so particular" was all I got. They almost never missed my brother's parent-teacher meetings, even if it meant taking time off work. For mine, their seats were always empty, so much so that my teacher once thought I came from a single-parent family. Yet my brother was always kind to me. He would secretly slip me his pocket money to buy my favorite snacks. After I got scolded by our parents, he would clumsily comfort me, saying, "Don't cry, Yvonne. Big brother will protect you." He was the only one, apart from Ethan, who ever gave me warmth. But my brother was a few years older, with his own studies in life, and later he left for college in another city. He couldn't always be there to shield me. Some wounds were beyond his reach. When I started high school, because the school was far from home, I moved in with my uncle's family. My aunt worked out of town most of the year, so most of the time, it was just my uncle and me. It was a weekend afternoon, and I was doing homework in my room. My uncle pushed open the door and locked it behind him. I panicked immediately and asked him what he wanted. He walked toward me step by step, wearing a smile I couldn't decipher, greasy and nauseating. "Yvonne, doing homework alone is no fun. Let your uncle keep you company." I trembled all over with fear, shrinking back as the pen fell from my hand. He grabbed my wrist with terrifying strength. His breath, reeking of cigarettes and sweat, fanned across my face, making me nauseous. "Yvonne, let your uncle take good care of you," he said. I screamed, struggled, and cried. At the critical moment, I reached for the lamp on the table and smashed it down with all my might. My uncle was injured, and my aunt drove me out. But that horrifying scene kept replaying in my mind, and from then on, I shut myself away, losing all interest in loving or being loved. Afterward, my migrant worker parents returned to our hometown. Only after what happened to me did they finally remember they had a daughter. It was my homeroom teacher who first noticed something was wrong. She called my mother to the school, phrasing her concerns delicately. "The pressure of senior year is intense, and your child might be emotionally unstable. I suggest taking her to see a psychologist for some counseling." My mother's face darkened instantly upon hearing this. When we got home, she pointed at my nose and yelled, "You're just crazy. Stupid from too much studying. You're a disgrace to our family." I kept my head down, unable to utter a word. Crazy it is, then, I was used to it anyway. Later, she probably truly believed I was sick beyond help. She began trying every possible way to pry open my mouth, to get some reaction out of me. At first, she used her most familiar tactic, nitpicking. "How did you mop the floor? It looks like a pigsty." Even if I had just scrubbed it spotless. "Your room smells like death, don't you know to open a window?" Even though the window was wide open. She would burst into my room unannounced, rummage through my backpack, inspect my diary, interrogating me like a criminal. I was like a puppet, letting her manipulate me. When this method apparently failed, she changed tactics. She began to treat me carefully with kindness. She would serve me dishes I didn't even like, ask about my day at school. That gentleness, laced with deliberate unfamiliarity, felt worse than scolding or hitting. I couldn't give her the genuine response she wanted. My heart had mostly died that summer when my uncle locked the door behind him. All I could do was pretend. Pretend to listen attentively to her, pretend to be moved by her concern. Deep down, I knew she could see through my indifference. The disappointment in her eyes pierced my heart like needles, but I was powerless. During that time, I even wondered if she had ever truly loved me. Otherwise, how could she not see the emptiness in my eyes? On the day the college entrance exams ended, the sky was exceptionally blue. As we crossed the street together, a drunk driver lost control and sped toward us. It was she who pushed me out of the way with all her strength. The screeching brakes, the crash, the gasps of bystanders, I watched helplessly as she collapsed in a pool of blood. Outside the operating room, relatives surrounded me. "Your mother sacrificed herself for you. Your life is owed to her. You must repay her with filial piety, you owe her." I owed her. Those words became a curse, tightening around me like a noose. During the long days at her hospital bedside, my thoughts were a tangled mess. I remembered the stories I'd heard about my birth. When my mother was pregnant with me, everyone said I'd be a boy. My grandmother was overjoyed, preparing baby clothes for a grandson, telling my mother not to worry. But then, out came a girl. Grandma immediately took all those new clothes away, not leaving a single piece behind. My mother, still weak from childbirth, forced herself to get up and painstakingly sewed little clothes for me, stitch by stitch. Seeing her pale face after surgery, so frail she seemed on the verge of vanishing, I felt for the first time with such clarity that she loved me. How laughable. She was willing to throw herself in front of a car for me, willing to die for me. Yet she refused to believe the me who, as a teenager, had struggled alone in the darkness at my uncle's house, crying out in despair. She didn't believe me, she only trusted what she saw with her own eyes. The moment she woke up, the first thing she did was grab my hand, checking over and over to see if I was hurt. To ease her worries, to stop hearing those accusations of you owe her, I began to force myself to act like a normal person. I learned to smile, to initiate conversations, to ask about her health. The smile on her face grew more frequent, and the atmosphere in the hospital room lightened. Everyone said I had grown sensible, matured. Only I knew that I had simply buried my true self even deeper. After graduating from university, my brother stayed to work in another city. He had his own life and social circle now. Occasionally, he would call home to check in. Between us lay not just mountains and rivers, but also an unspoken past. He was still the brother who would secretly slip me pocket money, but he could no longer protect me at all times. During my sophomore year, a small incident stung me once again. That winter was particularly cold, and my brother called saying he wanted to eat the cured sausages Mom made. Without hesitation, Mom went to the market to buy the best pork, spent several days marinating and drying them, then carefully packed and mailed them to him. When she returned from mailing the package, she was in high spirits, even humming a tune. I casually mentioned, "Mom, I'd like some too." She paused, as if only just remembering me. "Oh, your brother was in a hurry. Besides, you're at school, the cafeteria has everything. You won't miss out on this." She didn't know how desperately I craved a bite of homemade sausage that winter. She also didn't know that to save money, I often ate nothing but steamed buns and pickles. Her love for my brother was proactive, meticulous. For me, it always seemed to be an afterthought, something she forgot. Just like during parent-teacher meetings in childhood, my brother's seat was always occupied, while mine remained empty. Some things, it seemed, had never changed. As for my father, in my hazy memories, he was mostly silent. Ethan and I made an appointment to finalize our divorce at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. Dragging my exhausted body home after work, I pushed open the door only to find the living room uncharacteristically lively. My aunt's family had come, including my uncle. He had been laid off from the factory years ago and now looked even more aged, with streaks of white at his temples. But that familiar, nauseatingly hypocritical smile on his face hadn't changed one bit. My mom and aunt were sitting on the sofa, chatting animatedly and laughing non-stop. I changed my shoes and quickly headed toward my room. "Stop right there." My mom's displeased voice rang out behind me. "Yvonne, are you blind? Can't you see your aunt and uncle sitting here? Like a dead person, can't even greet anyone? No manners at all." I took a deep breath, suppressing the waves of disgust and irritation churning inside me. Turning around, I forced a stiff smile. "Aunt, uncle." My uncle's murky eyes roamed over me, that gaze still sending a bone-chilling cold through me, like slimy insects crawling over my skin. At the dinner table, my aunt cleared her throat and began her lecture. "Yvonne, let me tell you, in a marriage, it's common for tongues and teeth to clash. Ethan is a boy we've watched grow up, he's not a bad person at heart, just made a mistake in a moment of confusion. Men, after all, who among them doesn't put on a show now and then? Just turn a blind eye and let it pass. You're still young and don't understand these things. If you get divorced, how will you find someone else? A woman who's been married before isn't worth as much. Besides, I heard Ethan has already promised not to make the same mistake again. If you keep making a fuss, won't it just make everyone lose face? My father remained silent as usual, pouring himself one glass of wine after another, though the corners of his eyes kept glancing at me. My mother's expression, however, softened bit by bit with my aunt's words, even showing a hint of agreement in her eyes. Yes, Yvonne, what your aunt says makes sense. Ethan has realized his mistakes these past 2 days, waiting for you downstairs every day. I can see he genuinely wants to make amends. Life must go on, so just a slap. I couldn't hold back any longer and slammed my chopsticks down on the table, cutting off my mother's words. I coldly met my aunt's face, which was plastered with a hypocritical smile. What does my divorce have to do with you? Ethan cheated during our marriage, kept a mistress, and in your eyes, that's just a man's momentary lapse, playing around? A divorced woman is worthless? Then what about a cheating man like Ethan? Is he some kind of prized catch? My aunt's face flushed crimson instantly, as if she'd been slapped in public. The well-maintained facade of her benevolent smile could no longer hold. How dare you speak to me like that? Her voice suddenly rose sharply as she pointed a finger at my nose. I'm your elder. Everything I've said is for your own good. Don't be ungrateful. You have no manners at all. Yvonne. My mother also snapped at me sternly. How can you talk to your aunt like that? Have you no sense of propriety? She's your elder. No matter what, she means well. I sprang up from the chair in an instant. For my own good? She's doing this for Ethan's sake. Or for her own ridiculous sense of seniority and face. Why doesn't she tell Ethan to mind his own business? Why doesn't she tell that Cecilia to have some self-respect and stop breaking up other people's families? Why should I swallow my anger and endure this injustice just to accommodate that pair of scoundrels? Seniors? Since when do seniors have the right to twist the truth and ignore right from wrong? I suddenly turned to my uncle, who had been feigning deafness the whole time, my voice rising sharply with years of suppressed hatred. What my uncle did to me back then, have you all forgotten? Does a senior like him even deserve respect? Watching my uncle's face turn deathly pale and my mother's shocked, bewildered expression tinged with panic, I felt only a cold, painful satisfaction. Some wounds still bleed when reopened. But the pain of keeping silent is far worse. My aunt's well-maintained face instantly flushed red, then turned ashen, a spectacle of shifting colors. She pointed at my nose, her finger trembling slightly with rage. You ungrateful wretch! How dare you speak such nonsense? I was giving you well-meaning advice, and you have the audacity to insult your elders. Is this how your parents raised you? Huh? I let out a cold laugh. Good intentions? More like a weasel paying respects to a chicken, harboring no good intentions. What did Ethan promise you to make you so eager to speak up for him? Or is it that, Auntie, your own marriage isn't exactly blissful, so you can't stand to see others happy? You insist all women should endure a lifetime in miserable marriages just like you? My aunt was left speechless by my words, her trembling finger pointing at me shaking even more violently. My uncle, meanwhile, avoided my gaze entirely, not daring to look me in the eye. My mother slammed the table hard and shouted angrily, Enough. Yvonne. Shut your mouth. How dare you speak to your elders like that? Have you lost your mind? Apologize to your aunt and uncle right now. I turned my gaze to my mother, my eyes icy. Apologize? Why should I? Was I wrong? Or do you think, Mom, that your daughter being harassed by her uncle is trivial, not worth mentioning? Do you also believe that a daughter betrayed by her husband should just swallow her pride and endure this rotten marriage for the sake of so-called appearances? Yvonne. My father's deep voice finally rang out, carrying a hint of warning. But I no longer cared. The years of pent-up grievances and anger erupted like a volcano at this moment. Since I was little, when have you ever truly cared about me? For my brother's birthday, you go all out, but for mine, a casual blessing is all I get. No matter how busy you are, you always make time for my brother's parent-teacher meetings, but mine? You're forever absent. I was treated like that by my uncle, and when you found out, your first reaction wasn't to protect me but to silence me, afraid of embarrassment. Now, my marriage is falling apart, and instead of supporting me, you're siding with outsiders, forcing me to submit. What gives you the right? What gives you the right to treat me like this? The living room was deathly silent. My aunt opened her mouth but ultimately said nothing, pulling my dazed uncle along as they practically fled in defeat. My mother, as if deflated, slumped onto the sofa, looking at me with complicated emotions. Yvonne, what am I supposed to say to you? Harmony in the family leads to prosperity in all things. Why can't you understand that? Your aunt only wants what's best for you, afraid you'll have a hard time in the future. I curled my lips into a mocking smile. What's best for me? Mom, do you even believe that yourself? If she really wanted what's best for me, she'd be urging Ethan to turn back before it's too late, not pressuring me to compromise. If you truly cared about me, you wouldn't have let my uncle off so lightly for what he did back then. My mother opened her mouth as if to argue, but in the end, it dissolved into a long sigh. Ethan isn't a bad kid at heart. She was still making a last-ditch effort. I cut her off. Mom, enough. Ethan and I, we're done. The decision to divorce was crystal clear and unshakable at this moment. The next day, at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. It was already 9:30, half an hour past the agreed time, and Ethan still hadn't shown up. Just as I was about to turn and leave, Ethan appeared. He looked much more haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, a scruffy beard, and his suit wrinkled, completely devoid of his usual vigor. I couldn't be bothered to look at his disheveled state. Who was he putting on this act for? Since you're here, let's go in, I said coldly, stepping ahead toward the bureau's door. Yvonne. Ethan grabbed my wrist, his voice hoarse and pleading. Do we really have to go this far? I shook off his hand and walked straight into the bureau. The procedure was simpler than I'd imagined, except for the 1-month waiting period. Stepping out, I looked at the bustling streets and thought, I'll never marry again. Before the ridiculous cooling-off period for divorce was even over, I heard the news that Ethan and Cecilia were now legitimately together. The matter of Cecilia's pregnancy had inevitably reached Ethan's parents. Ethan's parents had been longing for a grandson for ages, and the child in Cecilia's womb became her strongest bargaining chip. Under the dual pressure of his parents' eager expectations and Cecilia's threat involving the child, Ethan had no choice but to agree to be with her. I didn't care. All my energy was poured into work. The company had recently secured new investors, with ample funding ready to make big moves. The boss emphasized at the mobilization meeting that the new project was crucial to the company's future, demanding that each of us give it our absolute best with no room for error. The division of assets between Ethan and me proceeded surprisingly smoothly. I took the majority of our marital property, including our joint savings and another investment apartment. Ethan only kept the house we had lived in together. A month later, I went to collect that piece of paper declaring my freedom. Cecilia came along too. She deliberately placed her hand on her still flat belly, wearing an undisguised triumphant smile, her eyes brimming with provocation. I couldn't even be bothered to spare her a single glance. The divorce certificate was processed quickly. Once I had it in hand, I turned to leave immediately. Yvonne. Ethan suddenly called out to me. He looked at me cautiously, his eyes tinged with a mix of hope and regret. Can we still be friends after this? Could you add me back on Facebook? A decent ex should act as if they're dead. Apart from some wistful sighs over the past, I didn't feel much sorrow. I didn't go out of my way to spread the sordid details about Cecilia and Ethan. But the world is just that small, some things can't stay hidden forever. In the past, Cecilia had often boasted to her colleagues about how close as sisters we were, never missing a chance to mention me and my husband, Ethan. So when she and Ethan finally found happiness together, the truth about how she had schemed her way into our marriage quickly spread through her old social circles. After all, no one is a fool. Cecilia was soon forced to resign from her original company due to the disgraceful reputation of being the other woman. A pregnant woman with such a tarnished reputation finding a decent job again was simply a pipe dream. In the end, she could only slink back home to rest during her pregnancy, cared for by Ethan's mother. Ethan's mother was a typical, rather traditional rural woman. It wasn't that she was particularly bad, but her habits were rough around the edges, and her straightforward thinking often led her to do things that were both laughable and jaw-dropping. As for Cecilia, she had always prided herself on being delicate and somewhat aloof with her artistic pretensions. How could she tolerate such a down-to-earth mother-in-law? Thus, Ethan's household soon became a battleground, with small quarrels every few days and major fights every week. Cecilia first clashed with Ethan's mother, accusing her of being unhygienic and backward in her thinking. After quarreling with his mother, she would then turn to Ethan, complaining about his mother's faults and his inability to provide her with a better life. Caught between his mother and his beloved, Ethan was overwhelmed and exhausted. Gradually, he came home less and less, preferring to drown himself in social engagements rather than face the domestic chaos. Meanwhile, I poured all my energy into my new work and life. The company's new project was progressing smoothly. Several major business collaborations I was responsible for, thanks to innovative copywriting and precise marketing strategies, had achieved quite favorable responses. The performance has been soaring, and at the quarterly review meeting, the boss openly praised me by name. Soon after, came the promotion and raise. Due to a new project, the company brought in a new deputy general manager named Sean. Young and capable, decisive and efficient, he was poached by the boss from a major corporation. On his first day, the boss called a meeting with all department heads. In the conference room, Sean's sharp gaze swept over everyone. When it was my turn to report on the work progress, he suddenly interrupted me. "Yvonne, is your right wrist bothering you?" I was slightly taken aback. Recently, while rushing the project, my old wrist injury had indeed flared up a bit, occasionally aching faintly. But I had been trying my best not to show it. The boss quickly explained, "Sean, Yvonne injured her wrist a few years ago and has some lingering effects. It can be inconvenient during high-intensity work." Upon hearing this, Sean's gaze held a hint of scrutiny before quickly returning to calm. "You've worked hard," he said quietly, signaling for me to continue. After that, Sean seemed to give me special consideration. Important documents would be delivered directly to my office instead of having me fetch them from his. For meetings requiring prolonged computer use, he would specifically ask his assistant to prepare a wrist brace for me. Once, he even noticed me struggling to open a bottle cap and wordlessly took it from me to open it himself. These subtle gestures made me extremely uncomfortable. I disliked this feeling of being treated differently. Even more, I didn't want to be labeled as weak. Subconsciously, I began keeping my distance from him. When it came to work handovers, I kept things concise and strictly professional. In private, I avoided him as much as possible. The first phase of the new project was a huge success, and the company held a celebration banquet at a high-end hotel's ballroom. While I was exchanging pleasantries with a few partners, Ethan, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, appeared. Holding a glass of wine, his steps unsteady, he walked straight toward me. "Yvonne," he grabbed my wrist with an alarming force. "Yvonne, let's talk, please." I really know I was wrong. His eyes were red-rimmed, his once handsome face now filled with exhaustion and desperation. "Let go," I said coldly. "I won't." "Yvonne, give me another chance." Just then, a calm male voice cut in. "Sir, please release her." Sean had appeared out of nowhere. Ethan, bleary-eyed, glanced at Sean and then at my wrist, still in his grip. Instead of letting go, he tightened his hold with a mix of defiance and despair. Who are you? This is between me and Yvonne. Stay out of it. I won't repeat myself. Let go. Ethan seemed provoked. He suddenly yanked me toward him with brutal force. I gasped in pain. The next second, Sean acted. He seized Ethan's wrist and twisted it sharply. Ah! Ethan cried out in pain, forced to release me. Then, without hesitation, Sean threw a punch. Ethan staggered back, a trickle of blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. He seemed to sober up a bit, his eyes red as he roared and charged at Sean. The two instantly tangled in a brawl. The banquet hall erupted in uproar. Soon, security rushed in and pulled them apart. Sean had a cut on his lip, but his gaze remained sharp. Ethan, on the other hand, was a mess, his hair disheveled and clothes crumpled. Naturally, the aftermath of the fight led them to the hospital. Sean only had superficial wounds and was treated quickly. Ethan's nose seemed crooked and required further examination. I sat on a bench in the hospital corridor, waiting for the police to take my statement. After getting patched up, Sean came out and sat beside me. Sorry for dragging you into this, I murmured. He shook his head. Not your fault. Cecilia arrived, her noticeably rounded belly leading the way as she hurried to the examination room where Ethan was being treated. Spotting me, she froze for a moment before shooting me a venomous glare. Ethan emerged from the room just then, a bandage plastered over his nose. He noticed Cecilia's hostile gaze, frowned, and without looking at me, strode to her side and grabbed her arm. Let's go. Cecilia gave me one last resentful look before being half-dragged away by Ethan. By the time the police finished taking statements, it was already late at night. Sean silently escorted me downstairs. A few days later, I walked into his office on my own. Sean, about what happened that night, thank you. He set down his pen and looked up at me, his gaze as steady as ever. No need. I took a deep breath and decided to cut to the chase. Do you have feelings for me? The air seemed to freeze for a second. Sean's expression didn't waver as he met my eyes. Yes. I admit, my heart skipped a beat in that moment. But soon, reason took over. I'm sorry, Sean. I truly appreciate your previous care and help. But I can't accept it. He slightly raised an eyebrow, seemingly unsurprised, and simply waited quietly for me to continue. I don't want to be given special treatment because of my hand, or any other external factors. Besides, I just ended a marriage, and I have no expectations for relationships right now, so there's no need to waste your time on me. Sean was silent for a few seconds. I understand. Professionally, I still admire your abilities. Personally, I'll keep my distance. True to his word, Sean gradually faded out of my life. Work handovers remained efficient and precise, but there were no more of those meticulous considerations. The conference room no longer had specially prepared wrist guards. Important documents now required me to pick them up from his office myself. The way he looked at me returned to its initial scrutiny and calmness. The new project wrapped up smoothly, and I received a substantial bonus. Coincidentally, a close senior from university was preparing to quit her job and start a bubble tea shop, asking if I was interested in becoming a partner. I invested my bonus and most of my savings into it. The senior handled product development and daily operations, while I took charge of HR and brand promotion. The milk tea shop was located near the university district, and business was getting better and better, with its reputation gradually building. Every day, watching the steadily increasing revenue in the back end, I truly felt for the first time that hard work pays off. I planned that, if all went well, I could open the first branch in the city center next year. Cecilia lost her child. My aunt, who shattered my worldview, personally revealed the answer to me. After my divorce from Ethan, she actually sent her own daughter, Laura, who bore some resemblance to me, to Ethan's bed. My aunt's scheme was loud and clear. She simply thought Ethan was rich. With me, the original wife, out of the picture, her daughter, this cheap substitute, might just hit the jackpot. At first, Ethan pretended to refuse a few times. Later, however, he went with the flow and tacitly allowed Lara's advances. When Cecilia discovered Ethan and Lara's affair, her belly was already high and full, about 8 months along. It was said that on that day, she caught Lara wearing clothes in a similar style to hers, deliberately mimicking certain mannerisms. Cecilia broke down on the spot, lunging at Lara like a madwoman. How agile could she be with that big belly? In her panic, Lara shoved Cecilia hard. Cecilia fell. By the time the baby was delivered by C-section, it had already stopped breathing. A vibrant little life, without even a chance to see this world, was just gone like that. Cecilia's family and Ethan's relatives were furious, adamant about suing Lara for intentional harm. They wanted nothing less than for her to rot in prison. The incident quickly became the talk of the town. That day, I was at the milk tea shop reviewing the new quarter's promotional plan when my mom called, her voice frantic and distorted with anxiety. "Yvonne. Come home right now. Your aunt's here, wailing and carrying on." Rushing home, I pushed open the door to find my aunt sitting on the sofa, her face streaked with tears and snot. Seeing me, she latched onto me like a lifeline, throwing herself forward. "Yvonne. You have to save Lara." I was startled by her dramatic gesture and subtly avoided her grasp. "Auntie, stop crying first. What exactly happened?" The more I listened, the darker my expression grew. After all the commotion, it turned out that the universally despised homewrecker in the office was none other than my cousin, Lara. Cecilia had laid down the terms: either pay $500,000 to settle privately, or face her in court and let Lara go to jail. My aunt had run to every relative but still couldn't scrape together such an astronomical sum. So, she set her sights on me. What left me utterly dumbfounded was her sheer audacity. "Yvonne, this is all your fault." I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. If you hadn't insisted on divorcing Ethan back then, how could he have taken a liking to Lara? Lara just made a mistake. In the end, isn't it because you vacated the spot? So you should be the one to pay the $500,000. You owe our family this. I was practically driven to laughter by her outrageous bandit logic. I've seen shameless people before, but never someone who could so blatantly twist black into white. My mother trembled with rage and immediately started arguing with her. "Have you no shame? Your daughter brought this upon herself and took a life, yet you have the audacity to come asking Yvonne for money? Our family doesn't have that kind of money, and even if we did, we wouldn't give a single cent to someone like you." My aunt sat on the ground, throwing a tantrum, wailing that we were heartless for refusing to help in a life-or-death situation. I called the police right away. They arrived quickly. After hearing the story, the two officers looked at our family with indescribable complexity in their eyes. In the end, it was Ryan, Lara's usually quiet and reserved younger brother, who scrambled to borrow money, even resorting to high-interest online loans, to barely scrape together the 500,000 yuan in compensation for Cecilia's family. Later, Ryan made a point to seek me out once, right outside the bubble tea shop. The man, not yet 30, had sunken eyes and an unkempt beard. His once straight spine seemed bent under the weight of this sudden, senseless calamity. He looked at me, his voice hoarse, his eyes filled with exhaustion and deep guilt. "Sis, I'm sorry for causing you all this trouble." Seeing the red veins in his eyes, my heart ached. "This isn't your fault, Ryan." He gave a bitter smile, said nothing more, and turned away, his figure lonely. In that moment, it struck me that among that rotten family, Ryan was the only one with any sense of responsibility. A shame he was saddled with such a sister and mother. Because of the accident, Cecilia suffered severe physical trauma. The doctor said her uterus was badly damaged, making it nearly impossible for her to conceive again. A woman who had lost her child had also almost permanently lost the right to be a mother. The price was unbearably steep. Shortly after Cecilia was discharged from the hospital, Ethan married her in a low-key ceremony. There was no grand celebration, just a simple meal with relatives from both sides. After all, having just lost a child, there was hardly any joy to speak of. The scandal had ruined Ethan's reputation, and he naturally couldn't keep his vice president position at his former company. Not long after, it was rumored he'd found a new job at another sizable firm. The salary, they say, was even better than before. That's just how the world works. As long as you still have value, those so-called scandals and moral stains are quickly washed away by the tide of profit. Gossip and rumors are no match for the allure of cold, hard cash. To pay off his debts, my uncle went to work at a construction site hauling bricks. Within days, he fell from the third floor. Both his legs were broken, and he nearly didn't make it. After a night of emergency treatment, he barely clung to life. Ryan used all the compensation money to pay off the online loans and medical bills, settling most of the debt but completely draining the family's savings and leaving him practically crippled. When I heard the news, I was doing inventory at the shop and almost laughed out loud. These days, being good is hard, but karma sure comes fast. That night, I ordered a whole table of barbecue and cracked open a beer to celebrate. For the first time in my life, I realized that this feeling of schadenfreude was more satisfying than bubble tea. The next evening, my aunt showed up again, her face weathered, looking a decade older. She came in with a humble tone. "Yvonne, our family's in such a state, could you lend us a little more money? We'll pay you back later." I cut her off, "All the money's tied up in the business. There's not a penny left." Truth be told, there was still some cash flow in the accounts, but I simply refused to give them a single cent. Even charity felt like dirtying my hands and my mood. Some might call me cold-hearted, but if it were someone else lying on that hospital bed, I might have considered helping out a little. But for him, my uncle, he deserved neither sympathy nor pity, let alone any assistance. My aunt's face twisted instantly. "You ungrateful wretch. After all we did for you when you were little. Now that you're successful, you turn your back on us, is that it?" "Say whatever you want," I replied, staring at her. "I won't be involved in your family's affairs anymore." She stormed out, cursing loudly and slamming the living room door hard enough to shake the walls. I didn't even bother to frown, just relieved the air was finally clear again. Mom was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, sighing and frowning. "Yvonne, maybe just give your aunt something to save face? So people won't say we're heartless." "No money," I said calmly. "Let her talk all she wants. If she's really that capable, she can have the whole world criticize me. Reputation, it matters a lot to others, but to me, it means next to nothing." Later events proved I lost nothing at all. Those who needed me still came knocking, and those who needed favors still couldn't bypass my connections. As for the gossip, it was just seasoning for idle chatter, worthless and harmless. When my brother heard about the family drama, he wanted to come back and check on things, but I stopped him. After the divorce, no matter who in the family tried to persuade me, no one could make me date or marry again. I even started to wonder if so-called love was just one of life's biggest lies. There's no need to please anyone, pleasing yourself is enough. Having money, a career, changing to a new bag, new lipstick, or a new experience every month brings more security and substance than any promise or vow. Whether it's the glitz and glamour or quietly sipping a cup of milk tea alone, it's all fine. I live only for myself, and from now on, I will never compromise my own happiness for anyone's expectations again.